Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Some follow-up points in this video about Zhang Zhilei, Joe Joyce. It's easy to overrate or underrate or dismiss fighters who lose and big up the one that won, but there are some important points to talk through, because where do you rate Zhang Zhilei now after that win over Joe Joyce? How far does Joyce drop down? Was it an off night or other things at play? And I do think styles make fights came into this one. And I would also say Zhang is not unbeatable. And I think some people will now overrate his ability compared to if he was facing a different style of fighter. Anyway, first point, where do we rate Zhang Zhilei after that? Heading into this one, maybe arguably he was somewhere between top 15, top 25. You know, there are points within the heavyweight division when you're ranking fighters where, based off what they've done, it's hard to really sort of get a gauge, an accurate one, because they don't fight each other often enough. And sometimes guys with different style matchups that suit them can end up being a bit higher than maybe they should. Zhang, clearly a little bit underrated by the heavyweight division overall. I mean, everyone should have known that this was a dangerous fight for Joe Joyce. I think just most people expected that Joyce would see off the danger because of what he'd done recently against non-punchers like Joseph Parker, for example. But we'll talk about, Joyce soon and some of his things. But Zhang, I think we can safely say that based on that performance, that maybe he is inside the top 10 or there or thereabouts, at 10, just outside, just inside. And I don't think that's unfair to say. I mean, many people thought that Joe Joyce was maybe the 5th best heavyweight in the division, somewhere there or thereabouts based on his recent work. And it had a good resume, had some good wins. And just because Joe Joyce lost that fight doesn't mean he's not a good fighter. We've known that right from the beginning, what he was. That he was big, tall, cumbersome, slow, but he had this juggernaut thing going for him where he could take shots and just sort of plow through and eventually grind his opponents into the dust. That didn't necessarily change with this fight. He just didn't get the opportunity to really put it on Zhang because the fight ended due to that eye injury. His eye had closed up. The doctor said he couldn't continue. We don't know what would have happened had he been able to continue. But Joyce is still a very good fighter. It doesn't change because he lost to Zhang. It just means that Zhang goes up in most people's estimations. So whereabouts? Just inside the top 10? Or is he sort of closer to 5, 7? I think this will be a point of contention. But Joe Joyce is still a top heavyweight. And I need to stress that. I think this is one of the best cases of styles make fights that we've seen recently. This was a style that suited Zhang Zhilei, and that he was able to get off the left hand and put the hurt on, and he hurt Joe Joyce multiple times in this fight, but also he was able to damage that eye to the extent that Joyce was deemed not able to continue. So I think Zhang certainly deserves to be considered as a top contender at this point. He's got the WBO interim title. He will then have the opportunity to fight for that belt at some point. How long and who he has to fight in between whenever that fight occurs for the title, unclear. But it is a case styles make fights is important, because you had Joyce, not a good style for him, puncher in the southpaw. And I think the southpaw element cannot be understated. Clearly he struggled in there. And early on I was thinking Joe Joyce is circling right into the left hand, and he took a number of them in the first round. Joyce just seemed a bit at sea, and certainly the punching power played its part. The strategy to box and move, it was just minimal in the fight, a bit in the first round, but once he became more of a static target, especially at range, and he was hittable and those left hands were landing, the right hooks to the body and head as well, Joyce just really was starting to get peppered with shots. So I think styles make fights is important. For Zhang Zhilei, I've seen him box a number of fights. I know that there will be a number of people who are new to Zhang, haven't seen him fight a lot, but he can be beaten in my view. I think the style that would be more his kryptonite is the boxer who can box and move, got a bit of power, but clearly also defense as well. He's been taken all 10 rounds before by Andre Rudenko. He dropped some rounds in that one. Zhang Zhilei can be beaten. He will be beaten at some point. and it will be a style matchup that won't suit him, that will contribute to that. Clearly, he's got a good chin, he's got a lot of power, but he is beatable. But he is also a very good heavyweight, and he's proved that again. Obviously, with the Filip Hrgović fight, a lot of people were saying that he should have been given the nod. I mean, I think from my recollection, I thought at worst it was a draw for Zhang. But you also have to look at some of that and go, well, clearly Filip Hrgovic's stock goes up by default in some way because he stood up to the punishment and ultimately went on to win that fight. Controversially, but still, he was able to rack up some rounds later in that fight as Zhang started to fade. And that's one of the things against guys who can box and move and stay out of the way that Zhang will have trouble with at some point down the line. We've seen that before, a little bit with the Hrgović fight. He faded badly in the Jerry Forrest fight, and people say, oh, well, there were other issues at play there. But we've seen it before. So Zhang Zhilei is a good fighter, but styles make fights. And the Joyce style matchup, we always knew it was going to be dangerous. He would be dangerous when he was fresh. And Joyce, too many punches. But I guess the other question with Joe Joyce is, was this just an off night? Or are the hard fights, the training, is it catching up with him? Because he didn't look great in there. And is it a case similar to maybe like a Dillian Whyte, or maybe the better case, Adam Kovnarski, who was a guy that just blocked a lot of shots with his face, kept coming forward, that his chin eventually cracked and he's looked like a shadow of his former self, the guy who was blitzing through guys, a few years ago. Now he's dropped 3 on the bounce. Is Joe Joyce, is the hard training and fighting, all the shots to the head, catching up with him? It certainly is a question, and we need another data point or two to really know that. But I think Zhang being a big puncher didn't help Joyce in this fight. He wasn't able to walk through the punches. In fact, he was getting backed up at different times. But the question with Joyce and what next, will he take the rematch? It's interesting. Still a good heavyweight, clearly still a good heavyweight. He's racked up some really good wins in recent years. A couple of other things, can he do better in a rematch? Well, certainly the defense is going to have to be better. And right from the get-go of his career, we've been saying this. At some point, it's going to catch up with him. Blocking punches with his face is not a strategy that is going to work well in the long run. And as he got to the top end of the division, especially facing a puncher, it's caught up with him. And these are all things we've been saying, even ahead of the fight. Most people were saying, if he sees of Zhang and his power and he can manage to avoid the best of Zhang's work, he could do well in that fight. But there was always the danger with Zhang, and it backfired. Defense is clearly Joe Joyce's kryptonite, and maybe facing a southpaw as well. He spoke about it after the fight. He had trouble with it. So what did you make of Zhang and where he is, where he's at? Who do you think is a good fight for him next if it's not Joe Joyce? Is he top 10, inside, outside, there or thereabouts? Joe Joyce, where do you rate him now? Was it just an off night, or is he on the decline? I think it's probably too early to sort of say that. But based on what happened, Zhang deserves a lot of credit, and I'm looking forward to seeing both these guys back in the ring, regardless of who it's against. Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.